Hey everybody, Jake from Amtryke here. We've got our TP3000 laid out on the table. We're going to do a full build of that today. We haven't unpacked anything yet, but here's all the tools we're going to need for the build. So we've got a 15mm wrench, a 13mm wrench, 10mm wrench, a 5mm and 6mm Allen wrench, cable cutters, Phillips head screwdriver, and a chain brake tool. So that's everything we'll need to put this together. And then we'll go ahead and unpack everything now. And we're back. So we just got everything unpacked here. Now we're going to run through and talk about what each component is. We're going to start back here. All these parts were in our small box. So we've got our QR code for instruction manual, which you'll scan, and that's probably how you got here. And then we have our steering limiter installation. We'll walk through that today as well. We have our pedals, we have our pins for the seat back adjustment, our pedal washers, our hardware to install the seat back, zip ties for our shifter cable, and then we have all of our headset components here. And then we have our steering limiters here, our rear derailleur, our back wheel quick release, our seat quick release, the support tubes for the seat back, our chain, the bearings for our headset assembly. Then we have our chain tubes that go underneath the frame. We have our rod that connects our right and left front wheel. We have our flag. We have our chain link that's going to be used to connect the chain brake tool, and then these tools here were added for assembly. These two parts here, our brake noodle and our cap, were in our small parts box. We're not going to use these for this assembly process. Then we have our rear wheel, and then our two front wheels, our frame assembly, both steering handles for right and left, our shifter cable, brake cable, and our pedal boom. So we've moved all the components we're not going to be using for this first step, and the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and install our front wheels and our rear wheel. We've made a little stand here that helps us support the frame. You can use a box or something like that just to keep the frame in a more usable position. So we'll go ahead and start with this back wheel. Don't need any tools for this. We have a quick release lever and we have our back wheel. So we're going to want this cassette on the right side of the frame. So this is how it's going to be oriented in that frame. We're going to grab our quick release. We're going to spin off the nut on the end. And then there are two springs here. And the cones are facing toward each other. So you have the small end on the inside, the large end on the outside. You want to keep that orientation the same. And you want one on each side. So we'll spin that off. We'll take off one of these. We're going to go ahead and slide that through. And you can see that's now sticking through there. Set that down. We're going to grab the spring that we took off. Again, the small side goes in first. And then we go ahead and restart the nut. And we're not going to fully tighten that yet. We want to make sure that this lever is open. If it's closed, it could be too tight and it won't slip into place. So now we're going to come here and it's going to go from underneath. So we're going to need to pick the frame up like this. Go ahead and get our wheel there. And then we'll come around to the other side. And then try to drop the wheel into the dropout. So there we go. It's on this side. Should be able to slide it up on this side. There we go. Perfect. So we've got it seated all the way up. What I'll do is go ahead and pull this nut off so you can see that that axle is all the way up in place. So it's all the way up against the top here. That's going to fully seat it and it's going to keep it in a straight position. So I'm going to go ahead and spin this down. That's going to compress those springs for us. And then once I feel like there's good resistance, I'll go ahead and close this lever. And now our back wheel is on. Now we're going to move up to our front wheels. We have lots of pieces to put these assemblies together. We have some alloy spacers. We have some dust covers, some washers, a bolt, a cap, some bearings. So we'll go ahead and start assembling these here. So we're going to start with the left side. It doesn't matter if you start with the left or right. Try to rotate that. So the first thing we're going to do is put on our dust cover. And that's going to seat all the way at the bottom. And then we're going to grab our first bearing. We want to make sure that the balls of the bearing are facing up on the bottom, and then on the top we want to make sure that those balls are facing down. So that looks good. Now we can go ahead and start to slide this up into place. Perfect, just like that. We don't need it to sit fully in place just yet. So now we're going to grab our top bearing, again with the balls facing down. And then we're going to go ahead and grab our split washer, which has a small break here that allows it to expand and contract into place. And that keeps our bearing located. Scratch that. We actually need to do the steel washer first. That pushes down on the bearing more, and then we're going to take our split washer and put it over top there. So one thing we did forget, and this might happen to you, is the dust cover here. It will not slide over this steel piece. So what we'll do is we'll try to slide these two back out. And if that does happen, you should be able just to push down on the assembly and then lift up, and that should release everything. And the reason it's locked in is that split washer is doing its job. So now we're going to grab the dust cover. That goes first, and then we're going to go with the steel and then the split. So now we can go ahead and slide the whole assembly up, and you notice the split washer stayed in place. Now we can go ahead and slide it down, and because of that split washer, it kind of holds it where it needs to be. So now what we have left are these 3 aluminum spacers. Slide all 3 of those on. It's good. And I'm going to grab my steering handle. That's going to complete. So we've got 2 steering handles. And we need the left one, which is here. And you know this is your left one because it doesn't have the shifter on it. The right one gets the rear shifter. So this one we can now go ahead and try to slide in place. These bolts come tight from the factory, so if it doesn't slide on, you just loosen these 2 bolts. But that one seems to be going on okay. Go ahead and just crack these loose. Perfect, and it slid right down. Great. So now all that's together. At this point, you just want to make sure that everything looks to be sitting in the right position. Nothing looks crooked or out of alignment, and I think that all looks good. And we've got a cap here. We're just going to set that on top, and we've got our bolt that holds the whole assembly together. So we'll go ahead and start that by hand, and we're going to slowly tighten this down. We do want this bolt tight, but we don't want it overly tight. Okay, so I've just got a little bit of resistance here. I'm not pushing too hard, but I want to check to make sure everything spins freely. I don't have any play, and that all looks good. So before I tighten this all the way, I'm going to go ahead and hold this wheel in a straight position, and I'm just going to eyeball where I'm going to want this arm. We can always come back and adjust this later, but I think I want it about there. And we're going to go ahead and tighten the 2 side clamping bolts. And this is a 5mm Allen, just like the top bolt is. And these we can go pretty tight on. And then one last snug on our top bolt. Good. Okay. So the left assembly is done. The right assembly is going to go together exactly the same way. The only thing we did miss is this plastic cap. It's just a cover for this bolt. It literally just pushes directly into the top there. Now this assembly is completed. And then off camera, we'll go ahead and do this other side since the assembly process is exactly the same. Okay, so now we've got our back wheel on and both of our front wheels installed. Everything looks good so far. We're gonna go ahead and get started on our steering rod that connects the right and left front wheel. And then after that, we'll go ahead and slide our pedal boom into place. So for the steering rod here in the front, we have two adapters that attach them to the right and left steering assemblies. They're labeled accordingly. So one of them will have an L stamped into it, and that's for the left side. And then the other one has an R stamped into it for the right side. And the only two tools that we're going to need for this is a 13mm wrench, and then we've still got our S wrench, our 5 and 6 Allens. So the way this goes together is we're going to start. We have our left. So if I'm standing here beside the trike, my left side, this is going to go here on the left. Now there are two holes here on the assembly, and you'll notice that you can put it here, which is good, or you can put it here. Now if it's facing out like this, it's not actually going to come into contact with the steering rod, so we want to make sure that the locating pin here goes into our outer hole, and then our inner hole is going to get the bolt. So we can go ahead and slide this here. And then I'm going to come from over the top with my bolt, and that bolt will hold it in place while we grab our steering rod. And then we're going to slide that up, and then we're going to grab our nut. I'm just going to start this by hand and then move my hand. Good. And I don't need to tighten this up all the way yet because it's going to be easier with this loose to go ahead and do our other side. So now we're going to grab our other assembly with the R, move around here, go ahead and take our nut off just like we did on the other side. And again, two ways to put this in, but just like we did on the other side, we're going to use the locating pin on the outer, and then we're going to bolt through the inner. That points both of these in, because again, you can install them backwards and the steering limiters will not be effective from that position. So we'll go ahead and slide our bolt into that front hole. Good, located. Then we grab our steering rod, and we're just going to push on the other side and then slide it up onto this bolt, and then start this by hand. Now this is a 9-lock nut, so that's as far as I can go by hand, but you can tell this assembly is still loose. But we can check functionality. We're hitting there and we're hitting here. So it's doing everything that it's supposed to. Now we can go ahead and tighten up the assembly. We're going to use our 5mm Allen wrench and a 13mm wrench to tighten this up. This is a ratcheting wrench. I'm going to switch to the non-ratcheting side. I'm going to go righty-tighty until that tightens up. Okay, so that one looks good. Now we're going to move on to the left side. I'm going to use the same tool, 5mm Allen, 13mm wrench. We'll go ahead and tighten this up. Again, these are righty-tighty bolts. we're just going to check the assembly. I can only turn to here before I hit the orange piece on our right side, and then I can only turn to here before I hit the orange piece on the left side. So that all looks good. And lastly, we're going to start with our pedal boom. And one thing to note on the pedal boom, there is a minimum insertion line. It's probably going to be difficult to see, but it's stamped into the steel here. It's about 4 or 5 inches from the end of the tube. You need to make sure that this is not visible when you put the assembly in. So there are 2 bolts here. Both of those are 5mm Allens. So if that's tight, which it may be from the factory, all you're going to do is use your wrench and just break each of these loose. And then we're going to slide our boom in, which can be tight. Okay. And this is going to vary depending on your rider's leg length, but we're just going to start it in place. And then we're just going to snug these up so that we don't lose these bolts. And that's it for the pedal boom and the front steering assembly. Okay, so now we're going to start on our chain system, and the first part of that is installing our rear derailleur. This was in your small parts box, and then to install it we're going to need a 5mm Allen wrench. So the hanger for the derailleur is back here. So the large thread is the bolt on the derailleur here, and then we have a set screw on the back side that is going to need to align with this flat spot here on the back. So when you're installing this, you want to make sure that this bolt is facing up and back. If you install it here, you have potential to squeeze on this and break the derailleur. So we're going to make sure that our screw is pointing up and back. And then we want to make sure that our threads are straight. And we're just going to start it slowly. Should require minimal effort to start the threads. If it takes a lot of effort, it may be cross-threading, remove, and start over. Okay, so now I've got that started. And you can see I can pivot it in place here. And it's right at about this position where that set screw in the back finally hits the frame. So we can go ahead and keep tightening. Right there, we just bottomed out. So now we're going to go ahead and fully tighten that. And we're going to make sure that everything rotates and moves the way that it's supposed to, and everything looks good. So now we're going to go ahead and start on our chain tubes. There's a bolt that comes pre-installed on the frame from the factory. It's a 4mm Allen bolt, and it has a silver washer with a specialty shape. So we're going to go ahead and remove that, making sure not to drop it or lose it. And get it most of the way with the tool, and the last little bit I'm going to finish with my hands. Okay, we can set that to the side. So here are our chain tubes from the factory. These are going to come set up in this orientation. I find that it fits a little bit better if you flip your top tube. So what I'm going to do here is use a Phillips head screwdriver and break this loose. And what that's going to do is allow me to not only rotate here, but also slide. So with that loose, I can slide this piece back down, and all I want to do is try to get them close to lined up front to back. So that looks about right. So I've got the same distance here and here, and same distance here and here. I can go ahead and retighten this bolt. Okay, so now we can come up here. We're going to slide it over the steering assembly, and then we've got the V shape of this bracket pointing toward the back, which is what we want. And then I can get the screw back here. So I'm going to grab the nut and bolt, and I'm probably going to hide this process with my hand, but as soon as I get it started, move. Okay, so I've got a couple threads started there. So you can see I've got the washer lined up with my bracket here, and I've got the bolt started. So now I'm just going to grab my 4mm Allen and go ahead and install this screw all the way. And these, the bracket for these chain tubes is malleable. It can be moved and adjusted as needed. So that's here. So as you can see, our tubes are pointing off to the side a little bit here. I find the easiest way to correct that is just to add a little bit of bend to them on this bracket. And you can see I'm already much closer on this one. And same thing for this one. Just going to add a little bit of bend to that. And sure, what I'm trying to do is align them up here with this front gear and our gears here in the back. So give this top one just a little bit more. Good. And the back and the bottom one just a little bit more as well. Yeah. So that's a really good starting position for those tubes. If you find that it's binding or anything's catching wherever, all you need to do is just make those adjustments. You can slide these forward and back, and you can pivot them around these locations. So now we'll go ahead and start with our chain. So we're just going to be routing the chain through these tubes, around the front here, around both these guide pulleys at the bottom, through our rear derailleur, and then back to the bottom, and we're going to connect it with our master link at the bottom. So this is a long chain. More than likely when you take it out of the package, it's going to look like this, where you have lots of twists. All you need to do for a twist like this is rotate up and over. So there's one, and I've got one here. Go to the bottom, just like this. There's another one, and then we've got 3 more to fix. And what we can do is we can get those further down the line. So we've got about half of our chain loose here. We can go ahead and start feeding it through. So we know that the top is going to go over this chain wheel here. We can go ahead and put it in place. It's going to give us a little bit of a guide. And started with the wrong side. So one thing you're going to run into is if you start to feed your chain, you have one side that has a pin that's not fully pressed in. So if you decide not to use your master link, you'll push this in with the chain tool that you received. If you're not going to be pushing this in and using your master link, you'll remove this. So we haven't removed it yet, so I can't feed my chain through on this side because I haven't removed this pin. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the other side, untangle it. Same way we did the other side. Good. Okay, close to half our chain there. And again, this side does not have the pin, so it will easily slide through our tubes. So I'm going to go through the top tube first, just like this, and use gravity to your advantage. Move the chain slightly, and before you know it, it'll be popping on the bottom here. So what you don't want is for it to fall back through. So we're going to continue untangling our chain here. Perfect. Okay, chain's running through. And I'm going to try to get about half of it through there. And I'm going to use the teeth here to keep it from sliding back through. And this is how much chain we have already run through. So here are our pulleys. Here we have an inner and an outer. So for the top here, it's going to be coming from the top of the chain wheel down, and we're going to try to get it in place on the inside. Okay, so that's there. And again, we don't want to pull too hard or we'll pull it off of the front. So then this is going to wrap around our rear cassette. Again, we don't need anything tight at this point. We just need to go ahead and get it in place. Now our rear derailleur is sitting all the way back. All we need to do is pull our chain through, and again around that cassette, just like this. And we're going to go around the top gear. So we're going to go from the front, and then we're going to go through the derailleur on the top portion and feed that through until you can reach it. I almost got it there. And it fell back through. There we go. So now we got a piece we can grab onto. Perfect. Good. So now we can go ahead and take this through. We'll do one gear at a time. Perfect. So our upper gear looks good. And then our bottom gear, we need to go through this slot on the back here, and then it's going to wrap around to the front. So I'm just going to hold this up and slide it into that slot and then pull it through. So there we go. Now we have our derailleur fully engaged, and it's sitting at the bottom. So before we're able to pull this chain all the way through, like we talked about, we need to go ahead and push this pin out to get it through these tubes, because we're going to be using the master link on this assembly. So the chain tool that you should have gotten with your trike is going to do that for us. So what I'm going to do is have the pin facing the outside of the tool like that, and then I'm going to go ahead and run the tool down, and I'm now hitting the back side of this pin, and I'm going to tighten until I pop that pin all the way out. Perfect. So now I'm going to loosen my tool, and you can see here I've pushed that pin all the way out, caught it in my hand, and then now we've got plenty of room to go ahead and thread this chain through our bottom tube. And again, I'm using gravity to my advantage. I'm going to hold this tube up and push through. You can go from the back to the front, but it's much harder to get that chain through from the bottom up to the top. Should be coming through here in just a second. And like right now, I don't have quite enough chain. So I'm going to spin this front chain wheel. It's going to pull some of that slack out of our upper assembly. And now the chain is through. Perfect. Okay, so we've got 7 or 8 links here, and we've got this here. If we were to try to connect it right now, we would be directly on top of this pulley. So what I'm going to do is try to pull some of this chain through. Let's see if that will work. So we're not on the gear there. Good. Okay. So there it goes, and you see what happened? I pulled too much, and it popped back through my chain tube. So I'm going to slide this back in. And one thing that'll make this process easier is if you have a bungee cord, you can hold your rear derailleur in place with. You can attach one side to the frame and one side to the bottom of the derailleur. It'll keep it in a better position. Okay, so now let's see if we can get some of this through. Now what we did here, the reason it's not coming through is we had it in 3rd or 4th gear, and this derailleur, without having a cable attached to it, is going to want to sit in 7th. So right now it's not wanting to rotate through, but it will. So let's go to 6th. Still not wanting to rotate. So we'll pull a little bit out of that derailleur and try to get some of this over the top here. There we go. So what I did is I just came off of that cassette and I slid some of this through, and then I'm going to lock it back into the cassette. That'll keep it from rotating. And now you can see I'm not directly on top of those gears. I'm just behind those gears. So we're going to go on our outer gear here, and we're going to go over top. And we're just going to slide our front chain through. Perfect. So now we've got just enough room to connect these two. Now again, if I'd left that pin in and I was happy with that chain length, I could just grab my chain tool at this point and attach these two pieces together. But I'm going to be using our master link, and this is a 2-piece master link. Let's see if we can set that. Perfect. So that stayed in place. There's enough tension in those chains to hold them together. But if you were to put any pressure on that chain, it would come apart. So this is a 2-piece master link, and both sides are the same, but they clip together. So there's a slot on either one of these. And what we're going to do is slide them together just like this. And you can see the width of this chain is the same on both. And we're going to compare it. It looks to be that it's an outer link of the chain. So you have wider and narrower links of chain. This is one of our outers. So the way the chain sits right now, we have an inner that we want to connect it to on this side, but then we have another outer link on this side. So we need to have 2 inners. So what we're going to do is grab our chain tool, and we're going to push off this outer link. So I'm just going to take off one link right there, spin this down the same way we removed that other pin. We'll push this in, and we're going to push that pin all the way out. And that's going to remove that outer link for us so that we'll have 2 inners. And I'm going to show it to you right now, but when I finish this, I'm going to hold my thumb over here, because what I don't want to happen is for this chain to come back through this tube. So I can use my thumb to keep that together. Okay, now let's see how we did. Okay, so now I'm going to remove it. There we go. So I should be left with 2 outer links and 1 pin. So now that I have an inner, I'm going to take my chain link and slide it through here. Now, I don't want to assemble anything until I have it in place. So this is going to go over our gear here. And then we've got our other piece here. Now, the rear part of the chain, we're going to go ahead and install it. So the front piece I have installed through the outer side of the chain. So this one I'm going to need to install on the inner side of the chain. So it should just slip right through, just like that. Now what I'm going to do is clip these 2 pieces together. So I'm going to go here and there. There we go. Both of those look good. And then once I have both of those pieces seated, I'm going to go ahead and pull. and that's going to lock our chain in place. So we slipped it through here where this hole is, and then it's locked in to this place here. And there we go. So now we have our chain routed correctly. Now we just installed this chain as standard. If you want to move this pedal boom out or in, you may have to adjust this length. So before you install this master link, you may want to take out however much you need depending on whether you've gone further out or further in for your particular rider. So that's our chain installation. And next we'll go ahead and jump on our brake cables and shifter cable. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and start on our front brake assembly. Just like the front wheels, the right and left are going to have the same style brakes, so they're going to attach the same way. So we're just going to do one side here. So in your box you should have gotten 2 cables and 2 housings for your brakes. Again, they're the same length and everything. So we're just going to work here on the right side. And the only thing we're going to need to do this assembly is going to be our 5mm Allen wrench. So we're going to grab one of our housings and cables, and we're going to start here at the top. So you have a barrel on one end of your cable, and then you have a mount for that barrel inside your brake lever. Now in order to get that in place, there is an adjuster nut here, and there is a slot in the lock nut and a slot in the adjuster nut. So what I can do here, I've got the slot for the locking nut lined up, but now I need to get both of those lined up. So you can see now I can slide a cable through there. So what I'm going to do is slide my cable out of my housing just a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and run my barrel into here. There's a slot that it sits in, so you're going to come from the top, slide it in place just like that. And then I'm going to follow this slot over to here. Good. And now I want to make sure that these 2 slots do not line up. Or you can make adjustments with these later, but you just want to make sure that this slot and the 2 slots on the adjuster nut and the lock nut don't line up so that this can't come back out. So top is done. Now we're going to go ahead and start on the bottom. So I'm going to route this backward so I don't come into contact with the steering rod. So I'm going to come down here. There's another barrel for the brake where that cable, the housing is going to sit here and the cable is going to run through. So I'm going to come here. I'm going to run my cable through that hole, and you should see it pop out the other side just like that. And then the housing is going to sit right up against that adjuster nut. So now, what I need to do is loosen this lock bolt. This is what's going to hold our cable in place. So I break it loose with my 5mm, and then I can loosen it by hand. And there is a small washer, a D-shaped washer here. And what you want to do is you want to slide your cable in between the washer and the bracket. So I have that just loose enough to where I can slide that through and it's not going to pop out. So at this point I want to make sure my housing is on this adjuster nut at the bottom and then also at the top. You want everything to be fully seated and make sure your cable is nice and tight. So next I'm going to use one hand to hold the cable and use the other hand to actuate this brake arm. So I'm going to hold the cable in place and then actuate this. If I have this pushed all the way to where I can't move it, the brakes will stay locked and the trike won't be able to move. So I'm going to back it up just a little bit here, maybe 1/4 of an inch, and snug this up. So I'm not going to tighten this all the way down just yet. It's tight so that the cable won't slide, but it's not all the way tight. Because now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up top here to our lever, and I'm going to check and see how the brake functions. So this trike is equipped with locking brake levers. So what I'm looking to make sure is that when I squeeze this lever, I'm able to actuate this locking pin, but not much more than that. So right now, I can squeeze this lever and almost touch my grip, which means that brake is too loose. I can activate the locking pin, but it's just not tight enough. It's not going to inspire confidence while riding. So that tells me I need to come back down here and again loosen this lock bolt And I'm going to hold this arm in place, and I'm going to pull my cable through just a little bit more. So there I went back maybe 1/8 of an inch, and I'm going to tighten this up again. And just a little bit of trial and error here. You want to get this as close as you can, and once you've got that set, you can use the adjuster nut at the bottom and at the top to really dial in your brakes. So now I've got that set. I'm going to check up here, and I get about half travel with this lever. And what I'm going to do, oh, we had a slide off there. So what happened there is it slid off, and you can see I lost my tension. So we're going to come back down, loosen this up again, and retighten. And again, we did another 1/8 inch because we were too loose. Okay, now let's see. So now I'm getting about half the travel on this lever. And right there at the end where I don't have much more travel, I can lock that pin. So that means my parking brake works and I get full function of this brake assembly. So I'm happy with that. If you wanted to, again, tweak, you would use this adjustment and this adjustment to loosen or tighten that cable depending on your riding preferences. So now that I'm happy with it, I'm going to come back to this bolt and tighten this all the way down to make sure that it doesn't slip. And the other thing left to do here is we have a cable just to make sure that these ends don't fray. Nothing that can poke you or stick you, so you're just going to put the cap on there, grab a pair of pliers and squeeze that cap to cover that. And again, the other side of the trike is set up exactly the same way, so we're not going to show you that. And then next we'll go ahead and start on our shifter cable for the rear derailleur. Okay, so next we're going to go ahead and start on our shifter cable assembly. So the shifter comes pre-installed from the factory, and then the housing for that shifter should be in your small parts box. A few other things that will also be in there, some zip ties that are going to allow you to attach it to the frame, and the cable cap, same ones that we used on our front brakes. There's going to be another one in there for your shifter. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. We want to make sure that our shifter is in 7th gear. So it may come in different positions from the factory, and we're going to rotate it until it's in 7. So then we're going to grab our cable, and we're going to grab the housing that was in the small parts box, and we're just going to go ahead and route this straight through. And it's a long cable, so it will take you just a second to get it all the way through. The hardest part will be getting it started and then getting it through at the end. If it does decide to bind up at the very end, the caps on these housings should be able to pop them off, and that'll help you get it through at the end. And you can see right here, we just popped that cable through on the other side. So we're going to go ahead and pull this all the way through. We're going to make sure our cable is seated into the shifter. And we know that we're going to want to come down here onto the frame. That's how we're going to be routing it. So I, just out of curiosity, I'm going to check the angle to go underneath and see if I like that better. So what I'm looking at is this angle. We don't want the angle to be too aggressive coming out of the shifter, and it is pretty aggressive. So we're going to stay up top here and route it over top and then toward the back. Okay, and we're going to worry about attaching it to the frame later. Right now, we're going to go ahead and do our rear derailleur adjustment. So the same thing we did with our brakes. What we need to do is look at our adjustment barrel here and slide our cable through there. Now, a difference that you'll see here that we have on our derailleur that we didn't have on our brake lever is there's a small channel back here that this cable needs to sit in. So I'm just going to continue to pull this through until my housing seats here. And before I let go here, I'm going to check up front and make sure my housing's still seated on my shifter. So now that we have the cable through, our shifter is in 7th gear, we also want to make sure that our chain is in 7th. So you want it to be on the smallest gear right here. And then what we're going to do is tension our cable. And as long as that's tight, this is in 7th and this is in 7th, we should be able to pretty easily make our adjustments to make sure that derailleur is shifting properly. So now I can go ahead, take my 5mm Allen wrench, break this loose. Again, we have our channel to run through, and we want our cable to go from the inside. We don't want to run it on the outside at risk of it coming loose. We're going to run here. And as I pull this through, I'm going to make sure that it ends up back on the channel back here. So now we've got our cable where we want it. I'm going to wrap this around my hand, and I'm just going to pull tight. I can still move this a little bit, but I'm holding it tight with my hand. And again, I want to check to make sure my housing is in the correct position for both. And while I'm holding this cable tight with one hand, I'm going to go ahead and tighten this lock nut with the other. Good. Okay, so now we've got that set. And we're going to have to make some adjustments on the derailleur itself. So what we're going to look for are the adjustment screws, which are back here. You have 2 silver screws that are going to make those adjustments. And what those are going to do, they're going to set your high and low, max and min travel for that derailleur. So in the next part, we will go ahead and jump through adjusting and fully setting your rear derailleur. Okay, so next we're going to go ahead and start on our rear derailleur adjustment. So basically what we're going to be doing is using our set screws that are back here, 2 small silver screws that adjust your high and low max position on this rear derailleur. So again, we started in 7th gear on our cassette, 7th gear on our shifter, and we have good cable tension all the way from the bottom. And now what we're going to do is take a look at our gears. I'll bring Adam around back here. We want to take a look at the alignment of our gears here. So if you can see, as I push this over, the alignment between 7th gear here and our derailleur gears changes. So right now, our derailleur gears are just a little bit further right than our 7th gear is here. So what I'm going to do is, using the high screw, which is this top one here, I'm going to screw that in, and you'll be able to see the 2 gears, the 2 red gears, move in to hopefully line up with our silver gear on the cassette. So I'm going to use my Phillips head screwdriver, and I'm just going to slowly screw this in. And right there is where you saw it start to move. So I'm going to loosen that back up. And you can see as I screw this in, it's pulling the arm of that derailleur over. So what I'm going to try to do initially is eyeball where these red gears line up with our small silver gear. And I think that's pretty close. I'm going to jump back here, take a look. I'm going to add about an additional 1/8 of a turn. And I think we're close there. So that looks good. Now we're going to go ahead and tuck this out of the way so that we don't get caught in the wheel or the cable. And we're just going to go ahead and rotate this in the freewheel position first, just to see if there's any catching, any binding. And it seems to be pretty smooth operation right now. So just like we used before, we're going to put this stand underneath the tadpole here, and what that's going to allow us to do is rotate this rear wheel in place so that we can check the adjustment of that shifter. we're gonna go here. So now we can rotate this rear wheel. And if Adam looks from the back there, he can take a look and see and just make sure that our chain lines up with those gears. You don't hear any cracking, any popping. It's not trying to jump out of gear, which means we're at a really good starting point. So we're gonna do that one more time. And it spins nicely. So it's a great start. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and adjust our chain up to second gear. And then from there, we're gonna go into first. We don't wanna over adjust into first right now because we don't wanna jump the chain off here and hit the wheel and potentially scratch the spokes. So we're gonna move it up to second, and then before we try to adjust it into first, we're gonna go ahead and adjust our low screw on the derailleur there. So I don't wanna do this without the wheel moving. I'm gonna rotate the front chain wheel while I'm shifting from 7th to 2nd gear. So there we go, we've hit 2nd gear. Now on here I show 3rd gear, so we're gonna see what happens if we try to move that into 2nd. Okay, so we did jump all the way up to 1st and we show 2nd. So we know we don't want to go any higher than this. We were very careful coming up that range to make sure we didn't jump off. So now we can use this other screw. So we did the top one for the high adjustment. We're going to use this bottom one for the low adjustment. Now, if you're not able to get into 1st gear, it could be that this screw is too far down. All you'll do is take that Phillips head screwdriver, loosen it up a few turns, and then that should allow you to get into 1st, and then we'll go back and adjust it from there. So we know we're in 1st gear, and what I'm going to do is just slowly start tightening this bolt. Until I see some sort of movement in the derailleur. There we go, and it's starting to pull it back. So I'm going to go a little too far. I've screwed the low screw in too far just to demonstrate what's going to happen. More than likely it's going to make a lot of noise and it may jump into 2nd gear. So let's see. So that's exactly what we expected to happen. It jumped from 1st to 2nd because that screw will not allow it to travel any further. So we know that that screw's too far in. So we're going to come here with our Phillips head screwdriver, again using the low adjustment screw. We're going to make a 1/4 turn adjustment. So we're going to turn that screw 90 degrees, and then test again. And it's making more noise now. It's trying to jump from 2nd to 1st, but we still didn't get it quite far enough. So let's do another 1/4 turn. And again, this is one of those where I would suggest doing baby steps and just kind of work your way up. You don't want to overshoot it, so you want to just get right up to it. So we did another 1/4 there. Now it's really trying to jump to 1st gear. So we'll do another 1/4. And let's see if that jumps it up for us. Quite. And you'll feel some resistance on this screw. When you stop getting resistance, it's not doing you much good to make that adjustment. So we did another 1/4. Try again. Same spot. And you can tell by that noise that we need to do a little bit more. And you can see now I'm making these adjustments and this is not moving, which means I've come all the way off that stop and it's not coming up into 1st gear. So now, earlier where 2nd gear took us into 1st, it's not quite far enough. So we can go ahead and shift into 1st gear and we'll check that one. Let's see. Beautiful. So that put us up into first gear. So I did that one slower because now we've pulled the cable a little bit further. If we're not sitting on that set screw, we can pull it too far and run it into the wheel. That's why I didn't spin it nearly as fast. So let's see how our set screw is doing. So I'm getting movement out of the set screw right now. This quarter turn is moving it back and forth just a little bit. And I know that we're in a good position. So I'm gonna leave it where we started. As long as it's not making any noise, I think it's a good starting point. And the next thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and cycle the shifter down to 7th and then back up to first gear. So, and then what we're gonna do with that is make sure we can still get to first gear, we can still get to 7th gear. So let's give that a shot. So it stays in first gear, it really doesn't make any noise, so I think our set screw and our cable tension are good. So now let's go ahead and pull this down. So shifting all the way to 7th, we did get to 7th gear, so that looks great. So we're gonna cycle it up to first one more time and make sure that the lower set screw adjustment isn't gonna keep us from going into first gear. So that looks great. We were able to get from first gear to 7th gear. And what you're gonna wanna do is while you're riding, the gears in between your 2nd gear, your 6th gear, you may get a little bit of cracking and popping where that chain is trying to jump from gear to gear and not stay in that one, that particular gear that you have it set on. And the way you're gonna make that adjustment is with your cable tension. So what you can do is use this. This is a barrel like we had on our brakes. You can screw this in, you can unscrew it, and you can see on your derailleur, you will get movement as you add and remove cable tension. So I'm adding cable tension, and since I'm in first gear, that's gonna try to pull this off of the entire assembly. Let's see if it'll do it. Nope, that looks good. So we're gonna jump down to 2nd. And by adding that cable tension, it's now not moving into 2nd gear. So let's go ahead and remove a little bit of that by going righty-tighty. A few rotations there, still nothing. So let's take it back to where it was when we started. Oh, and it's wanting to jump into 2nd gear, but not quite. So a little bit more. Wonderful. So now we're in 2nd, it's not making any noise. And then all you're gonna wanna do is fine tune that for your particular assembly. Just run through each gear and then adjust your cable tension as needed. But you've set your min and max, so you should have all 7 gears usable for the Tadpole. So now that we've done that adjustment, all we're going to do is the zip ties that came in the kit. We're going to attach those to the frame. We have some pads underneath here, underneath the frame. So there's one here, one in the middle, and one in the front. And all you want to be careful of is that you're not pulling this too far. You don't want too aggressive of an angle. You want to try to keep a nice arc so that this shifts easily. So you'll just install those zip ties, clip off the ends, and your derailleur should be good to go. Okay, so next we're going to start on our seat for the Tadpole. So there's 2 main pieces. So you have your cover, you have a padded bottom and a padded back. We're just going to attach that to the seat frame here, and then once that's done, we're going to use the hardware supplied over here to go ahead and attach that to the frame. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to grab our frame, we're going to grab our pad. The pad is side specific, so you have a chest belt and a lap belt on one side, and then on the other side is where you're going to strap around the frame to attach it. So we're going to face the chest strap and the lap strap down. And then we're going to put our frame over top. So these are just Velcroed. So all we're going to do is go ahead and put these in. So we'll come here, and you're going to have to fish these through. And you've got holes in the bottom. Slide both of these in, just like that. Good. And we're not going to install any of these too tight just yet. Might do on the next one is go ahead and separate so it's easier to pull this through. So we're going to just attach the Velcro so it's set up like this. Same for the second one. Run this over. So the way you want to set this up is you want to run through the bottom of the back hole first, and then up and over the top, loop down and through the top of the front hole, and then pull it through. And then we've got 6 of those that we need to do. So I'm going to go ahead and do all those real quick. So bottom of the back, top of the front. So that's these 4, and then we've got, sorry, there are 8, not 6. 2 more in the middle that we missed. So keep rolling. Last 2 last. So to start, our sling is going to go around the frame here, and then we're going to connect the 2 pieces in the middle. And you do want this to be pretty tight, so that's nice and snug. And make sure all of them are over the top. Okay. Of our middle ones, and then we've got 2 on the bottom here that we need to connect. Again, they're going to connect up the exact same way. And if they don't quite reach, you can adjust them out just a little bit more, and then stretch them until they do connect. Just like that. Okay. So that's 5 done. We got 3 to go. And we should be able to still get this one in here, but what we might have to do is unhook here. And then those same holes that we had to mount the bottom in, we have the same for the top. And you'll just want to stretch those over into place. Now, for this third from the top, you'll want to run it in between these 2 bars. So let's cut that section out just to fit in between there. And then top 2 attach the same way the bottom 2 did. might have set both of those up a little bit too tight. We got it. Perfect. So we got all 8 of those straps on. Everything looks tight, looks good for the seat. So now we're going to go ahead and attach the bottom to the frame. And to do that, we're going to use this large quick release lever. So all you're going to do is drop your seat onto the frame here, and it's not going to want to sit, it's going to want to fall backward, and that's just fine. And with this quick release lever, just like the other ones we've used, we want to have that lever open, we want to have it in line, and we're going to go ahead and run it through the frame here. Now, if you'll notice, I have the lever on the left side of the trike. You can put it on the right side, but the left side gives you a little bit more access. There's nothing over here, where on this side you have to worry about your chain tubes. So we're just going to start that nut on here, and we're not going to tighten anything up just yet. And this is where your individual position is going to matter. There are 4 different adjustments for this seat, and there are 2 different holes. So a shorter rider is going to need to be further forward, potentially use this front hole, and then you can do minor adjustment by changing on the 4 holes of the seat bracket, and your taller riders are going to need to use the back hole. And what I'm doing here is I'm tightening the nut on the back side while I'm holding the seat down and checking to feel when that quick release lever is going to get tight. So I'm not quite there. Keep tightening. Still just a little bit loose. So we're going to do just a little bit more. Okay. So it's definitely still loose. You can see the seat move, but it's in place right now, and we want to keep that there while we work on the back supports. So on the back supports, you have 2 lower rods and 2 upper rods. And to connect these to the frame, you have got 2 nuts and 2 washers for the top, and then 2 nuts and 2 washers for the bottom. And then to connect the 2 in the middle, we have quick release pins that will attach them. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to start up top here on that seat frame. So we're going to use the longer bolts. So there's going to be 2 different lengths that come in your small parts kit. You have a short and a long. The short bolts are going to be used for the long lower rods. The long bolts are going to be used for the short upper rods. So we're going to grab our bolt, we're going to grab 1 washer, and we're going to grab 1 nut. And these are going to slide into the seat bracket here. So, and if you look, you have 6 holes that are the same increment distance apart, and then you have 1 that's offset. This one that's offset needs to be the hole that you use for assembly. So we're just going to slide it into here, line up our holes until we can get that bolt through. So now that that bolt is through, we have a flat washer. We're going to put that on, and then we're going to install our nylock nut. And we can hand tighten it until we hit that nylon. And the 2 tools you're going to need to completely assemble this are a 10mm wrench and a 5mm Allen wrench. So I'm just going to hold that 10mm while I turn the 5mm Allen. And you don't want to tighten these all the way up just yet. You just want to tighten them until they stay in position. So that is not fully tight, but it's tight enough that when I move it somewhere, it stays. That's going to allow us to line these up much better, and then once everything's installed, we can fully tighten them. So we're going to quickly go ahead and do the other side. It goes on exactly the same way. Just like that. Okay. Get our washer. And again, let's tighten it as far as we can with our hand, and then we're going to use 10mm wrench and 5mm Allen to snug everything up. Again, we're not going full tight, just to the point where when you move it, it holds its position, and that's where we are now. Perfect. So that looks good. Now we can start on the lower rods. So we have 2 bolts, 2 nuts, 2 washers left, and that's what we're going to use to install those. So we'll grab 1 nut, 1 washer, sorry, 1 screw, 1 washer, and 1 nut, and 1 rod. And we'll go ahead and lift up our seat. We're going to slide the lower rod into the upper rod and hold both pieces together. So then we can go ahead, use our shorter bolt. We're going to run it from the outside, and then add our washer and our nut on the inside. And again, we're just going to start these by hand. So while I've got that there, I'm going to go ahead and grab one of my quick release pins and slide it through just to hold that in place. Again, we'll make that adjustment later once we have somebody on the trike. So now we're going to start on the other one. We're going to try to do this backwards. Okay. So the reason we wanted to hold this in place is we can now push that up and slide this through to rotate it down into place. So there's that. Bolt on the outside, washer and nut on the inside, washer and nut. Thank you. Washer and nut. Perfect. There we go. Okay, so now we have our last pin that needs to go in place. You'll make that adjustment on the seat, make sure it can slide in. This is where you would want to go ahead and do your seat adjustment. You'd move it forward, move it back, move these up or down, and once you make those adjustments, you'll grab these same tools. You'll go ahead, it's your 10mm and your 5mm Allen wrench, and you'll go ahead and tighten each one of these. So our 2 uppers are now tight, and then we're going to go ahead and do the lowers. And I really suggest making those adjustments before you tighten these, because once you do, you'll either have to loosen them, or potentially you will scratch the paint on the supports and the frame if you try to adjust them while those bolts are tight. Last one. Go ahead and tighten it. Okay. Now all of our seat supports are tight. The last thing we need to do is go ahead and tighten our base. So you can see right now there's some wiggle room in the seat, which we wanted to be able to adjust this back here. But now that it's where we want it, we're going to go ahead and loosen this quick release lever and tighten that nut a little bit more, maybe a half turn, to the point where it's going to require some effort to close the quick release, not to the point where it's impossible. But there, I've got it nice and tight, and the seat assembly is completely tight. So that's how you install the seat on a TP3000. Okay, so our last step on the TP3000 assembly is going to be to install our pedals. So you get platform pedals that come along with your trike. You can order different style pedals, but they'll all go on the same way. So these are actually stamped, they're labeled. There is a very small R. It's going to be really hard to see on camera. There's a small R right there, and there's a small L stamped on this pedal. So those correspond to the side of the trike where they need to go. So if you are sitting in the trike, the pedal labeled R is going to go on your right side. So that's what I've got here. I've got my right side pedal, and it's going to thread in here. Now your trike is also going to include some small washers. These are not 100% necessary, but they're great if you wanted to not scratch the crank arm here. So we're going to install it. So we're just going to put the washer in place. And for this pedal on the right side, it is going to be righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So I am turning this by hand in the clockwise direction. And I'm making sure that this is completely straight with the threads on here to ensure that it goes in properly. I'm going to go as far as I can by hand right there, and I'm stuck. Now I'm going to take my 15mm wrench. This is a standard 15mm wrench. Ideally you would have a pedal wrench, but not everybody does, so that's why we're using regular 15mm today. So all I'm going to do is continue to tighten that. Perfect. So our right pedal is done, and now we're going to jump on the left pedal. It's going to go on almost the same way. The only difference on this pedal is the direction of the threads. So where our right pedal was righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, this one is going to be righty-loosey, lefty-tighty. So if we want to install this pedal, we need to turn it counterclockwise, and it should start to draw itself into that crank arm. And again, I'm going to go as far as I can by hand. Perfect, I've bottomed out there. And we're going to continue to turn counterclockwise until that's tight. So now we've got both of our pedals installed. Aside from our safety flag, which is over here, we do send every trike out with a safety flag. If you'd like to install that, there is a hole that's pre-drilled in the top of this seat. The padding covers it from the factory, so if you wanted to access that hole, you would just cut a small slit in that padding, and then you would slide your flag into place. So again, that's how you fully assemble a TP3000 from the box.